Hello, I'm Citrus, and you're looking at the 1/100th scale ASWG-08 Gundam Barbatos. This came out in 2015 for 2,500 yen, and here's the size comparison with a Gundam marker. And in case you forgot what the small one looks like, here's a size comparison with that too. You can see the proportions are a little bit different. The big one, in my opinion, looks a little bit more filled out, especially in the middle. And a big gimmick of this version is that it has a much more detailed inner frame than the high grade does. And that's obviously afforded by the fact that it's a lot larger. So let's see what that looks like. Alright, so once you strip off all the armor, which is pretty easy to do since they're all designed to come off very easily, you get this sort of look. And after I spin it around, I'm going to show you a couple of close-ups. All of the gold bits you see are the stickers included. And I don't think they add too much, but they're basically in all the places that will show up once the armor is still on. Mainly the not the knees, the hips. Alright. So most of the detail upgrades from the high grade kit are all in the chest. You can see there's some more pronounced piston detail on the top of the shoulders there, and my favorite part is the neck, which has these two tiny pistons in there. They don't do anything, but they look really good when you pick them out in silver, along with the cable in the middle. Gives it a sort of menacing Terminator kind of look. And when you turn around the back, you see a really nice jumble of cables. Also looks really good in silver. Now the cables that run into the back of the neck, they are unfortunately made out of the polycap material, so getting the paint to stick on it without chipping is kind of a challenge, but with a little bit of silver, it looks really good. And you can see there are some additional pistons on the elbows. These are all separate pieces, so they're really easy to paint. And you also have some more on the back of the legs. Really like the cables here. And everything else is basically the same, like the cables on the forearms and in the back of the thighs. Tried to pick out some of the other detail in gunmetal, but unfortunately the flat coat basically took out all of the shimmers, so it's really hard to see unless there's a bright light, hence the light down here. But it still looks pretty good. Now that we've got the Barbatos all dressed up again, I'm going to run through the articulation and talk about some of the peculiarities in the sculpt. So the first thing you'll probably notice is that the shoulder stripe here is pretty messy. And it's because along the outside edge, there's no hard boundary. So if you're trying to like take it off or whatever, it doesn't really tell you, you don't really get sort of a feel where the paint should end, which is why it's all sort of crazy and runny and all that. The high grade did have a hard edge on the outside, so it was really easy to tell where your paint should stop and everything. But this just didn't end up too well for me, unfortunately. I did try to basically just sand off the excess, and it just didn't have any good clean edges for me to line up with. Second is the yellow along the bottom. You got to paint that all over again, just like you did have to do on the high grade. And the same for the squares on the thighs. And I really thought they would have been able to maybe put another piece in here or something, but you have to do that. I did, however, discover that the dark gray marker from the Xeon marker set actually matches the inner frame gray perfectly, so it's a much better use than the gunmetal that I used before. And the same story for this piece on the back, as well as little innards for these, and the innards for the elbows. Now, so the articulation, there is no second joint at the base of the neck, so this the first point where this is weaker than the high grade. You only get the one joint at the top, which can look down decently, but can't really look up at all, unfortunately. And I gotta say, the shoulder is designed to move on its own, basically. This whole section in the middle can move independently of the arm, forwards and back, as you can see. But the little clip at the top is a little bit fragile, so I wouldn't recommend taking the shoulder off too many times. You have the same usual universal shoulder And a double joint elbow allows you to bend about a 135 by the looks of it. The second joint doesn't do too much, but just gives you that little bit extra at the end. And ball jointed wrist. As mentioned earlier, you have the sort of emotive pistons in the waist, and there's a joint in the top right there that lets it bend left and right a little bit, and the chest itself can further rotate forwards and back on its own. Very good crunch, and the pistons do not restrict the mobility there at all. They do restrict the mobility going side to side a little bit, because the base of the pistons is rather wide and starts running into the skirt, and if you have it like twisted this way, the skirt basically can't come up at all because it's taken up all the space for the skirt to move upwards. But you can move it up just like that, and then it starts getting a little bit dicey up there. Alright, and let's put this all back down, and it looks like the piston just decided to pop out of its little tiny socket. So the soft polystyrene that the inside is all made out of doesn't tend to like to stick with itself very well, and that becomes an issue for a gimmick that I'll talk about in a little bit. So hips are the same as on the high grade, swinging back and forth, and universal joint, and you have the same double jointed knee, 135. And this is the second point where this suffers from the high grade. So you see on the back you have a little fake piston here, which looks great when it's going in and out like this, but as you can see it does stick out a lot on the back, which means the foot can actually only bend that much as opposed to all the way around. Now in most reasonable poses this is enough, but if you want to do anything basically crazier than this, the foot starts having to go into weird positions because it can't actually bend any further than this. And that really annoys me because it's just this little corner right here, that catches on it like that. But shaving it down is not going to make a difference because that's just going to push the problem further down the piece. So articulation, on average, good. Compared to the high grade, definitely not as good. And here we have the same sort of awkward crouch that you see the Barbatos doing. Not really because the articulation can't do it, but more just as a side effect of the proportions of the kit in general. Now, fortunately, you do see here that the limit in the ankle articulation isn't really getting in the way. But just keep in mind that if you want this leg out at all anymore, this is basically the absolute limit that the foot can do. Moving on to the accessories, you basically have two. You have the long-range gun cannon thing. I'm not really sure what it's called because I haven't watched that far into the show yet, but you basically have this, and you have a sword that is of a slightly different design from the one included in the high grade. And these are all well and good. The gun has a nice gimmick where you can sort of slide it like this and extend, and it looks really nice. But because of them, I now have a newfound hatred for white Gundam markers. It's pretty easy to have imagined Bandai would have just casted this middle bit in white plastic instead of having to make you paint it. And by the way, once you put it into the little holster on the back, it's going to chip it all off anyway, so it doesn't even make a difference. Alright, and on this, pretty easy to have done that in a separate piece, that as a separate piece, and maybe even the tip as a separate piece, but nope. All of this you have to do with stickers, and the sword doesn't get one at all, so good luck. And yeah, I did consider taping it off and masking it, but it's a very, very awkward shape in there, so spraying that would have been just a huge mess. And I mean, I know there are plenty of modelers on the internet who are much more skilled than I am, and they've probably been able to just, do it no problem, but it was definitely a huge problem for me. Also, no sticker included for the scope, so I went ahead and put in some metallic green for that. Don't really know why, because this is usually one of those tiny things that, we used to get on any other kit all the time. Right, and as I mentioned, there was an issue with the plastic, and this is the issue. So on the high grade, this was cast as a single piece, and this is a little arm that's supposed to come out, well, look like it's coming out of the backpack to hold this. And I'm taking off the backpack just to show you how that's supposed to work. You have this come off. The big ball joint goes inside here. This piece goes in here, and you take off the, well, here, I'll take that off. These little pieces you replace with these, and you have 4 of these for both sides. Alright, so once it looks like that, you stick the gun on like so. Alright, and it's supposed to look like it grips into the gun, except all of these pieces don't really dig in too well, so the hold is tentative at best. And once you stick this in and stick that back in again, you are supposed to have this thing in the backpack, and this is supposed to go into the hand of the Gundam while it's still connected and everything. And it's supposed to look really cool, except good luck trying to pose anything, because these will literally come apart at a moment's notice. You really got to take some time to, like, I don't know, nail polish or something to make the fit a bit tighter, but it just does not hold very well. Not to mention the articulation range in both ends of the joints aren't too forgiving, so it's not just like, oh, you can just slap it on. So a lot of fiddliness for, in my opinion, not a lot of real gain. Oh, and of course you get some holding things hands to hold everything. So overall, I gotta say, even though I wasn't exactly disappointed by this kit, I wasn't impressed either. I think I really got a sense that the budget kind of ran out, and there were a lot of places where it felt like Bandai could have just done a little bit more to have improved the overall build experience, or just add something more than the high grade, and it just didn't happen. Now, I know 2,500 yen for a 1/100 scale kit nowadays is basically nothing, but I have to keep in mind that basically this kit also doesn't really give you that much more. So you do get more details, but none of it is cleverly engineered enough to compensate for the other failures that they cause, like the ankles and the neck in particular. The amount of paint that's still required at this scale is a little bit ridiculous, if you ask me as well. Given the fact that this is more than twice the price of the high grade, I'd be really, really hard pressed to say this is even 1.5 times as good. It's definitely not twice as good, that's for sure. The biggest reasons now for someone to go and get this is, well, first they prefer the larger size, and at that, this does deliver. You know, it's a very good representation of the Barbatos and 1/100 scale, and in my opinion, perhaps even better value-wise than the big Tamashii Nations one that's like $160. The sculpt is better, in my opinion, and, you know, just none of the unnecessary frills. But that said, it basically is a big high grade. There were no real considerations to reduce the amount of paint required, to up the parts count and improve part separation or anything like that. There were definitely room for improvement, but for Bandai, it was pretty obvious that they were not expecting this to sell the line. Obviously, more of their development was focused on the high grade series, and I think for the rest of my collection, I will be focusing more on those. That said, I do have the 1/100 grays, and I think, given all of the good things I've heard about the high grade of that, I'm going to start with the 1/100 scale grays first. All right, and that way I just don't, you know, won't set myself up for any disappointment when I build the small one first again and then build the big one and realize that it just isn't quite as good. So I hope I didn't piss off anyone with my opinion this time around. I know that every single time I make one of these videos and I don't really like what I'm looking at, people tend to either agree with me or they would say that I'm a horrible idiot and that I should never make videos again. But that's just the truth of it. And thank you guys for sticking with me, and I'll see you at the next review. Thanks for watching.